People who've been kidnapped, how did you survive? I was kidnapped in my car when I was 18. I had been stalked by the guy for at least a few days, saw the same truck follow me a couple times on my way to college campus. I was just about to get out of my car to go to a bookstore, and this guy jumps in the passenger seat with a gun. He made me drive out of town to a remote area where his truck was parked. Never found out how he followed me to bookstore without the truck. He wanted to keep the gun on me while he got out of the car because I had a mace thing on my keychain. As he was backing out, he slipped and lost his footing, and I took off in the car. I drove straight to the police station. He was never caught. Almost. Age of 11, do not go to second location. Fight like hell to stay in the first. Even if you get taken anyway, raising a huge noise can cause a witness to come see what's happening to you, and they can report it. I was on my way home from school for lunch and some guy in a small quarter-ton truck gets out, claims he's a police officer, and tells me to get in the truck. Right away I'm thinking I'm not going anywhere with this clown. He claimed to be a cop and I asked, "Where's your badge?" While he's launching into this rant about how much trouble I'll be in if I don't do as he says. In my head I'm thinking all we have to do is bolt behind the house right next to us. That neighborhood had a whole mess of pathways that went all over the place. If we make it to that, there's no way that guy's gonna catch us. I straight up told him I'm not going anywhere with you. That caught him off guard, like he wasn't used to someone challenging him. He got this scared look on his face and got back in his truck. Then he tries laying this bullshit on us. He's some secret undercover cop and don't tell anyone he's there. Yeah right, my friend and I, we both ran home and told our parents first thing. They called the cops and we gave a full description of both the truck and the guy. The friend who was with me actually remembered the license plate. After that I couldn't tell you what happened. We never got an update from the police and never saw that guy ever again. I was kidnapped way before my memories formed, so this is all from my parents and a police report. Basically, a lady in the nursing ward decided to give me a spicy adoption by hiding me in some sheets and taking me out of the hospital. She was tracked down a few days later and I was handed back to my parents. She didn't mistreat me. Apparently I was a healthy normal child and she even bought the expensive stuff in order to take care of me. I got to meet her in my teens. I asked her why me, and it was because my family hadn't done the paperwork for me correctly, so I was easier to slip out and potentially give her more time to disappear with me. If you got more questions, feel free to reply to the message and I'll answer them. Edit. Forgot to mention, this was in 1998. I got to meet her when I was 17 in 2015. I got very lucky. The two men who kidnapped me from a bus stop, I was 16, had clearly done so with others before. They'd removed the door handles from the backseat doors, so when I tried to make my way out at a red light I couldn't get the door up. I'm pretty sure they intended to kill me. After they raped me, they drove me to an abandoned gas station and began assaulting me. But about an hour into the experience a police car drove up to check out what was happening. The man in the backseat with me at that time threatened to slit my throat if I screamed, while his partner got out and convinced the cop that I was his niece and that he and my dad brought me out to talk to me. He said they needed to set me straight because I'd been acting out. The cop insisted they leave the station right then, and he followed our car back to the highway. They got so worried he'd remember them if my body turned up the next day that they decided to release me. Right. I got thrown down a gravel embankment along the highway and ran in the dark to a nearby open restaurant. I will never forget lying there in the wet grass after coming to rest at the bottom of the embankment, gazing up at a sky filled with stars and realizing that, holy shit, I was somehow still alive, injured and anguished and violated and sorrowful, but alive and able to find a way through the trauma. I was very lucky. I was kidnapped when I was 7. It was by a very drug-ridden family member who told me he was bringing me out for ice cream. He left me on a bench outside of a bar when the bartender told him he couldn't bring kids in. It was a dirty biker bar in Las Vegas during the 90s. I was young, scared and didn't fully comprehend the situation. I was confused why I didn't go to an ice cream shop. The family member came out with 2 men That fully ducking terrified me. One of them touched my curly bright red hair and smiled wide. I remember not knowing what to do, so I started scream singing Joan Osborne's What If God Was One of Us. They got freaked when I wouldn't stop singing and walked back in the bar. I was definitely a weird kid, but scream singing as self-defense was kind of smart. I was left alone on the bench again when a man walked up and asked me where my parents were. I told him I didn't get ice cream and wanted to go back to my mom, but my family member wouldn't let me. He walked in the bar, but came out just a minute later and sat with me until the police arrived. 20 years later my mom saw that family member for the first time. He was on end-of-life hospice care, but made it to another family member's funeral. When everyone was filtering out he was waiting on the bus home when my mom punched him in the face. I love my mom. I was kidnapped at gunpoint along with my younger brother and my early 20s mother when I was in kindergarten. My father, 40 years old, hadn't taken the divorce well and already had some psychiatric illness, so he forced us all into his truck and drove us from California to Mexico. At the time my parents told us kids that we were taking a family trip. I remember the drive, shopping in a street market, and being greeted by the flashing lights of police cars when we eventually returned to the States. The police were nice and let us sit in the police car. I remember being excited about that. The next thing I remember was coming home to dead pets. I think just 2 mice, but still. Then being upset that I had missed picture day in school when I saw the other kids receiving their photos. I'm not sure how long we were in Mexico, but maybe that'll help set the time frame. I'm not sure what would have happened if my father hadn't decided to take us back. This thread has to set some sort of record for most serious replies on a heavy topic without the serious tag. Almost kidnapped at Oktoberfest in Germany when I was 15. A girl's phone was stolen, and I saw the people who took it. When she asked me if I knew who it was, I said yes, and she grabbed my arm and pulled me outside of the tent we were in. She kept asking me questions of what they looked like, but I felt odd and couldn't remember. A man drove up in a black caravan and asked what was the matter. He has a creepy smile, and it felt like he knew the girl. They also coincidentally knew Russian. Luckily, my mom followed us and ran out of the tent we were in and pushed me behind her. When the man said he was just checking on us, my mom lifted her fists and told me to run. I was in shock and couldn't move. Although we were in the back outside of the tent, there were still people who worked at the fest around. The man smiled and took the girl, who we later realized was the scout, and drove off. This was the scariest almost kidnapping I had ever encountered, and I love my mom for her willingness to sacrifice her safety for me to escape. It makes me tear up thinking about it. Edit. Thank you lovely stranger for the gold. I won't ask who, since I believe good things happen to those who give anonymously. Close bracket. I was kidnapped at 17 by goons my parents hired to take me to rehab when they found out I smoked pot. I was eating dinner with my parents when all of a sudden they got up and walked out of the room with no explanation. Then a few seconds later, 2 huge guys showed up out of nowhere, blocking both the exits to the kitchen, and told me to come with them. Since they didn't identify themselves at all or tell me what was going on, I assumed I was being kidnapped for real. So I grabbed a kitchen stool and started swinging. I took one down, but the other guy tackled and handcuffed me. After they forced me into a car, they explained who they were and that they were taking me to a wilderness program in Georgia. We were in DC, so I spent the next few hours apologizing, sucking up to them, and basically trying to get them as much on my side as possible. It worked because they stopped for food and told me they would take off the handcuffs and let me eat if I promised to behave. I was a model citizen all throughout dinner, and when we got back in the car they didn't put the handcuffs back on. A few hours later we stopped for gas. It was dark by then, and I asked to use the bathroom. One guy was filling the car with gas, and I noticed the guy who was escorting me to the bathroom was limping badly. I learned later I shattered his kneecap with the stool, so I figured it was my chance to escape. I made a break for it. I had a good head start on the guy pumping gas, and the limping guy couldn't keep up. I ran into the woods next to the gas station and just kept going. There's a lot more to the story, but I'm on mobile, so long story short, I found a road hitchhiked to the nearest town, and luckily still had my wallet on me to buy a train ticket out of there. I spent the next few months in hiding until I turned 18 and my parents couldn't touch me anymore. I wasn't in a dangerous situation, so IDK if this counts. I believe I was around 5. My dad was divorcing my mom, who was a raging alcoholic, compulsive liar and very mentally ill. So one day she took me to this large home where different women with kids stayed at. I believe it was in some kind of park or forest. I remember I asked my mom if daddy would join us or if he knew we would be gone. Of course she lied and said yes, he knows and he doesn't mind. I have no idea how long we stayed there. I don't remember if it was fun or not. But one day my grandma, on my mom's side, came and took me back to my father. I remember I was crying a lot because I wanted to stay with mom. My grandma didn't dare to get confronted by my dad, so she dropped me off and sped off. I remember the look in my dad's eyes as I just knocked on the door and he saw me just being there. I don't remember what happened after, honestly, but it's still an odd story. Not me, but a cousin of mine was kidnapped as a baby by his aunt and uncle and taken to Australia and raised as their very own child. The kid was born to a middle-income family in a third world country. My cousin's father's brother was a wealthy man in Australia who has spent the previous year living back home. Him and his wife, that could not have children, plotted to visit the new baby and claim him as their own, with the father of the child aiding them in the kidnapping. The baby was taken from the mother in the middle of the night. They drugged her and flown to Australia, where the uncle and aunt claimed the child was this. This happened in the late 90s, so I'm not sure how they did it, but regardless, the child was never returned to the mother. They ended up telling her where the child was, but threatened to have her put in prison and the child up for adoption if she ever spoke out, so she never did. My cousin was raised until 17 years old with his false family until he found the truth by reconnecting with his mother through Facebook. When he turned 18, he confronted his real parents and they admitted everything. The next day he moved out and flew 12 hours to go meet his new family. Really ducked up story. The kid is a great dude though. I don't know if I was actually kidnapped or just held hostage. It wasn't even a whole day, but a person pulled a knife out and backed me into laundry room and kept me there. A friend of mine was kidnapped on his paper route. The kidnappers' robbers wanted his van to commit a robbery. They handcuffed him and put a bag over his head and left him in the back of the van through the robbery. When they were done, they told him to count to 100 before he got up and took off the mask. Pretty crazy. I was kidnapped by a relative as a small child. I was told to hide in a closet while the police searched for me, and if they found me, they would hurt my kit. I was found. Kitten and I were returned home safely. My grandfather paid the ransom. They did it again. My grandfather got me back and didn't pay the ransom the second time. No one ever heard from the kidnappers again. My grandmother's brother was kidnapped and held for ransom. He's a successful businessman, was held at gunpoint in the parking lot of his office building, was in the papers and everything, and the photo they used coincidentally had my dad in the background. His claim to fame. It was a month before the kidnappers even made contact with the family to make their demands. These guys were pros. They've done this before and did their research. They knew exactly how much he was worth. It was really tough for us. From his accounts, they never physically harmed him, but he was kept in a dark room the entire time and fed sandwiches. Even got him his medication. Prayer and thinking of his family were the only things that got him through those 3 months. In the end, they caught the guy on top of the operation, and they let him go. To say he was traumatized is an understatement. I've never seen a person so broken before. Couldn't even crack a smile. What's insane is that another local businessman has just recently been kidnapped as well. When I was 13, my dad was undergoing treatment for a tumor in his brainstem and was on steroids and a pill cocktail that made him low-key crazy. He had been abusing me for a while, and when I told my mom, she ended up taking my brother, 7, and I out of his house. 2 days later he shows up at my school, and I'm thinking WTF, he's not supposed to be there. I run away, and he and a few other teachers start literally chasing me. I finally stop and get pulled into the office, where my mom is hysterically crying because she had gone to pick up my brother from his bus stop and he wasn't there. I told the administrators about the abuse and how I definitely didn't want to go with my dad, and because he played the cancer card they forced me to go with him. He took us back to his house, where he promptly fell asleep without feeding us, no food in the house, and all we had was our book bags. A few hours later he took us to Walmart because he needed more pain meds, and while he was yelling at the pharmacist my brother told me I just saw Mom. And I'm like, no way. But then I see a glimpse of her, so we run up to her crying and begging her to take us with her. My dad grabbed my arm and tried to drag me away from her, and the cops were cold. Long story short, they gave my mom custody and we got to go home. I wasn't kidnapped, but almost. I grew up in a really bad neighborhood. I was walking home one night when I was 12, alone. These two guys in a car called out to me holding a map and looked totally confused. I figured they needed directions, and I was taught to be helpful. I got close enough to hear, which meant close enough to be grabbed. The dude started trying to pull me through the window. I freaked out. I could see duct tape and rope in the back seat and knew if I didn't get away I'd be dead. I swung my fist as hard as any 12-year-old girl possibly could, made contact, heard a crunch sound, and was immediately let go of. I broke the dude's nose. I ran as fast as I could for almost 20 minutes, hiding in bushes and under people's porches just in case. I never told anyone, because I was ashamed I let myself get in that situation in the first place. In hindsight, I would have found a payphone, didn't have a cell phone at 12, and called the police, or told my parents. At least I got a punch in.